Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
Blessings, and I want to welcome all of you. My name is Jerry Teo, and here with the Healing Generation podcast. I'd like to welcome you again to another dialogue, another journey, another exploration of what the ancestors want to send through us today. We're here to really focus on how do we heal generations, but also how do we remember? How do we bring forth the medicine that our ancestors have carried for so many years and have available to us if we could just acknowledge it and maybe understand it a little bit and practice it and then share it in this good way. I want to begin by thanking Creator and thanking the ancestors and inviting the ancestors to come in and guide us and join us and be with us today. As we do this, I also want to acknowledge you, all of you that are listening, and ask you to acknowledge your ancestors and bring them in this space, because maybe some of these words need to touch them too. Some of these words need to heal them too. Maybe some of these words will acknowledge them too in a way they never got acknowledged before. So we're here, and I'm really very happy today. Very happy and pleased that we have with us a brother. Consider him a brother, consider him family, consider him a colleague, a community healer, great father, husband, and just really blessed to have Atil Narayan with us. So you can call him doctor, call him brother, call him homie, call him a whole number of things, but really just blessed to have you with us here, Atil, today. He's a doctor of acupuncture, but besides that, he's a giver. He's a giver of energy. He's a mover of energy. He carries through his veins and through his blood and through his spirit many, many teachings and many, many wisdoms. And we're going to be spending 2 sessions with him. There's so much that we have to talk about and so much to share that we'll do the first part this week and then the second part next week. So I want to begin by just Atil welcoming you and thanking you for who you are and everything that you're connected to and all the work you do, and give you the opportunity just to do your own welcome and do your own greeting that way.
Thank you so much, Jerry. With regard to that type of a welcome, that is exactly the way in which you received my wife and I many, many years ago. And I was told by a mutual acquaintance of ours that I want you to meet a healer friend of mine. And so I was ready to meet a healer friend. And so what you did is you brought my wife and I, and we sat in a circle on Mother Earth, and you began to pray. And you prayed for the 6 directions. You gave thanks for all the ancestors. And then you received us in that way, in the sacred circle. And that created a huge impression on me, because what a wonderful way to be received by anybody. And what I didn't know then was that, I've had many teachers along the way, and these teachers have appeared in my path when I needed those lessons. And they didn't come to me with this big sign on their chest that says, I will be your teacher for these lessons. But I had to have my own insight to say, wow, okay, I'm ready for this. And so at that time, you received us in that way, and you carried that father spirit, that healer spirit, that would, for me, come to symbolize a physical human embodiment of the type of father and the type of husband that I think in my heart that I long to be. And so with that, in that prayer, I remember when you thanked all the unborn children and all the future ancestors that have yet to come and to be manifest. And in my tradition, if a mother is pregnant, the first 3 months of that pregnancy, you don't speak of it. Maybe you might tell your mother or your father or somebody really close, but you don't tell somebody. And when you greeted us in that way, in that circle, in that sacredness, we couldn't help but to share that blessing of this news. And then you then, upon receiving that news, you gave a special blessing in the prayer to our babies that were to come. And so that was at least 14 years ago. And so there's some of us that meet people. There's some of us that meet people that are reflections of our past. There's some of us who are reminders of each other for where we are. And there are those that are that speak to us and guide us to bring forth a manifestation of our future self. And so in my heart, I feel like you're one of these persons that saw my future self. But what's funny is and interesting to me, and this is one of the many things that I love about you and Sister Susie and the whole camp, is that you guys have always saw me as that. And so until I got to the point where I fully, completely, and I'm still in that process of completely embracing and accepting that side of me. So I want to thank you for that. And, with regard to the question that you asked about, a little bit of my journey into healing, I was born in the Fiji Islands. My ancestors are originally from India, and we've been in the Fiji Islands for about 4 generations or so. And my ancestors were part of the whole indentured labor trade under the British Empire. And so when slavery had become abolished, they invented a form of labor system that was the extension of, or the next evolution of slavery. It was the indentured labor system. And so the reality for many of the indentured laborers, and it wasn't just Indians from British India, the colonial India, but it was, you had Chinese immigrants that were part of the labor trade. You had Europeans that were part of this labor trade. And that's how my ancestors ended up in the Fiji Islands. And so part of the heritage that I embody isn't just the heritage of having a descent that goes back to great-grandmother India, but of the Pacific Island people from the South Pacific. And so I try to carry the heritage and the lessons of this ancestry that I was born into.
Yeah. So you were actually born in Fiji, and your family, I guess, have lived there for generations. Can you tell me a little bit about that, about your upbringing there, and then how eventually, I guess, you ended up over here. So can you talk a little bit about that journey, because we also believe that there's teachings and lessons that arise from there.
Yeah. And so the Fiji Islands is 2 large demographics of people, which is the traditional island people, and then the Indian people that were brought over. Historical records show that it's mostly the northern part of India, in a state known as Uttar Pradesh, UP. And so in the 3 to 4 generations that we've been in the Fiji Islands, one of the things that has happened with us is that the caste system that existed in India, once they got into that boat, everybody was in the same boat, if you will. And so we may have a certain remnants of it in terms of your last name, in terms of where you belonged in the social, economic, spiritual order, if you will. But when it came to Fiji, a lot of that had to be broken down. It just didn't make sense anymore because we were all on the same plantation, all sweating.
Wow.
And so we worked in the sugarcane plantations, and my grandfather's and my grandmother's, my paternal grandfather and paternal grandmother's land is still there. I have a cousin who is a fourth generation sugarcane farmer that is keeping that tradition alive in the sugarcane fields. And so through that, my father, and in those days, Fiji got its independence in 1970. So in those days, my father was kind of bright in school. And so I say that because going to school was a privilege. You didn't just get a chance to go to school. So if you did well, then the family said, hey, maybe we can support this one. So they sacrificed extra and gave him whatever means and resources that they were able to put together so he can go get an education. And he did well enough to where ultimately he was one of the heads of the lands department in the government of Fiji. And for a little boy that didn't have his first pair of shoes until he was in high school. Now, when I say that to Americans, they're like, oh my God, wow, what a come up story. In Fiji, most people don't wear shoes. It's just an island thing. But, you know, he was that humble guy that made it to what would be the equivalent of the White House here, working in a branch of the government. And so that's my father's side, where I have that heritage of, in Fiji, we call it girmit, which is short for agreement. The indentured labor system was technically an agreement between the British government and the laborers. So the way they signed that contract, that agreement, was through a thumbprint, because many of the ancestors were illiterate. And so they didn't know how to read and write. Many of them didn't know what they were signing. They thought they were going to go work in this place, earn their money, and come back and be heroes in their villages. And so there were small percentages of people that were able to go back, but many people were able to stay in the islands and find a way to make it, to do well, to thrive. And it is a gorgeous, gorgeous place. The indigenous people of the Fiji Islands were, like most indigenous people of most parts of the planet that came under colonial rule, they had their form of genocide that took place. Lots and lots of indigenous people died with smallpox, the different diseases. But last year my wife and I, we took our kids back home, and it had been 30 years since my wife and I both, who's also from the Fiji Islands, had been back home. And we met with a surgeon. His name is Dr. Jone Hawea, who is an indigenous native Fijian. And so I was so happy to connect and break bread with that brother. And he was really proud to say that although his people had suffered under colonialism, their culture and their tradition and their heritage, their songs, their folklore, their mythology, their method and means of communication, their systems remain intact.
Wow.
And I was so happy to hear that part of it. And so here's a people that are really connected to the oceans, the sea life there. When we say the spirit, the living force that's in those forests and in those rainforests, they're really connected to those. And so the Indian people, if there were ever two people that were ever meant to meet, I believe it ought to have been us Indians from India and the indigenous people, because if you look at what they call organized religion, and Hinduism qualifies, just barely makes it as far as an organized religion goes. We have the belief system of the elements: earth, air, water, fire, ether. And so last year when we had gone back home, I was connecting with one of my nieces, and she had mentioned grandfather, which is my father's younger brother. And so she said that, the big conversation there at some point always comes up is Hurricane Winston that came a few years ago. And because it seems like these storms keep getting worse and worse and worse year after year. And so she had mentioned that grandfather, as the river was flooding and it was going to come into their property and into their home, he went outside and did an offering to that river. Mm. And so now my father never talked to me about any offerings to any river, so I was, of course, intrigued and curious about this. So when I met my uncle, I had asked him, I go, hey, did grandfather teach you that? And he said, no, grandfather didn't teach me this because this wasn't happening back then. It's happening now. Mm. So he learned it. And it was just the river receded upon that offering. And so I share that story with you is if you tell that to an indigenous Fijian, that's totally in harmony with their ability to communicate with, before they go out on a fishing expedition, right? And they pray to the spirit of the ocean, and they relate that there is a life, that the earth literally is alive, and that living deity that is the earth and all the beings that are in there, there's a way to connect with that and to that. And so that's, I can go on and on, but that's a little bit of the background of the Fiji Islands. And there was somebody that once said that, give me a child for the first 7 years of their life, and I will have them for the rest of their life. So I spent the first 7 years of my life in Fiji. And so I'll still catch myself saying back home. I've been here since I was 7. So,
well, it's interesting that you talk about that connection and how it's embedded in you. It was ingrained in you, but it seems like some of those things we don't talk about. Obviously your father was interested in doing whatever he needed to do in order to support you, and probably was thinking about the best for his children. And some of the lessons, because I remember those things too, that my parents didn't talk about those spiritual, ceremonial things, right? But there was a feeling that was there, but, there was no explanation. And in fact, sometimes my parents didn't want to talk about it, But I'm wondering, your experience, what you remember as a young boy, growing up in Fiji that impacted you, because you had 7 years. I don't know how much that you remember, but I'm just wondering, what were the teachings? What were the lessons that you learned while you were living there before you made that journey over here?
So there are reflections that I have when I think back at a particular time. And as I've grown and as I've had children of my own, then I've realized that there were things I was exposed to that I didn't realize then at that time that there were teachings. It was that's just how you lived.
Right.
And so I just remember being able to just run around. I felt, in a sense, freer there than here. When I came here, I felt like there was a lot more, being told a lot more, hey, quiet down, don't get too loud. It's almost like we're guests here. Oh. And so we were brought up in that manner, like, we don't really belong here. We're just like living here. And it's an honor for us to be able to live here. So that was one aspect of it. The other memories that I have is that when I was younger, in Fiji, I have a lot of memories of just being asthmatic. So I had a tough time, the whole asthma breathing thing, taking in a breath. And I remember struggling to be able to breathe. And so at that time, the modern type of, you can just buy it any drugstore now where, the ventilators or, something that can help you, or, there's lots of drugs that can open up airways and pathways. And in those days, we turned to traditional medicine, and those traditional medicines involved breathing in different type of plant life, be it eucalyptus or be it mint or be it camphor, different types of things that you breathe in to be able to help breathe. I remember my mom rubbing a vapor rub on the chest. I remember being looked after in that. I remember being taken to a medical facility where there was a white lab coat with a doctor in the Western sense, and then I also remember taken to the jungles out back in a ceremony in the middle of the night, that my father once again never really talked about. And it wasn't until in high school that I started to remember a few things, or in college I started to remember a few things, and I asked my dad, like, hey, did that really happen, or did I see that on a TV show? Did I dream it? He goes, yeah, no, that happened. But my dad wasn't ceremonial in the sense. He wasn't dogmatic. He was very philosophical. And so I now realize, in order for him to take me to that ceremony, how scared he must have been as a father when your child is struggling to breathe. And so when you get scared enough, then you become, on one hand, you can get scared stiff and frozen and you can't move, or you get scared enough to possibilities and ideas that all of a sudden open up to you that you didn't think you were down with before. And then so when he took me to that, it was a whole other scene there, But so my early years of Fiji it's the color that I remember, because it's the tropical island, and we're on the tropical end. Suva is very tropical. It's the sounds I remember. It's the colors of the sunlight. It's the weather. When we went back last year, I would just sit there in the back in the sunlight, feeling that feeling, because I remember that feeling. And I remember also now, when you're a kid, your parents are always older than you. They're always going to be older than you. And there's always that you'll never catch up to them ever. And so, but I now know upon reflection how young they were. And they were both at a point in their life where life was good and it was exciting, and life was better for them than it was the generation prior. And there was so much hope and so much optimism. And so, and my wife sometimes jokes with me is, how do you stay so positive? And it's just, I think I inherited those blessings of, my mom and my mom's side of the family. I was the firstborn. I was the first baby in the family. And so I received so much love and so much blessings from them. And so part of my glasses half full outlook and mentality, I think, had to do with being programmed very early on. I've heard talks that you do that, in traditional cultures, traditional ways, before conception, during conception, or in post-conception, all the way through, the spirit that is going to take the human form is preyed upon, is called forth. It's desired, it's wanted. And I felt like that I had that.
Wow. And I think, people don't realize the significance of that, the medicine that carries. When you're welcomed and embraced with love, when you're guided with love, when you're dreamed about with love, and then your family has to sacrifice and protect you, so that the otherly world messages don't penetrate that. And you mentioned fear, and I think that sometimes we're living in this Western world, and then fear reminds us of our rootedness. It takes us down back to our root. And in you having difficulty breathing in your father's fear, it took him back to the root, to his memory of what is it that heals our people. And so even though his intellectual mind may say that's not what we're used to doing, his spiritual self says, but this is what I need to do for my son. Whether that's what I think should be done or not, my spirit is saying, take him here, take him back. Let's reroot and reheal him with the medicine of the environment there, I think there's beautiful teachings that way, I wonder, because we recently had a conversation, and you talked about when you went back there, and And it really impacted me what you talked about sitting. I don't know if you remember the story that you shared about the brother that you sat with, and it's so simple but such a powerful story about indigenous medicine.
Yeah.
Can you share with us a little about that?
Oh, absolutely. So it had been 30 years since my wife and I had gone back to Fiji. And so in my head, like that's where I'm from. That's my home. Mm-hmm. And physically going back there, you just have to take 2 steps and they know you're not from here. So there's that American, all of a sudden I realize how American I really am. And so there was that insecurity that I had of being connected to this space and yet really not being from there in the sense that I can sit and just have laughs and conversations and with everybody in the way in which they do that. And so we ended up, my wife and I, we ended up in this one amazing condo-style resort that it was literally the northern part of the island, where it's not in the coastal sands area on the southern part. And we were there with this amazing views on top of a hill. I figured out how to drive on the other side of the road, thanks to, my wife as being my co-pilot, and, the GPS system, everything worked. And so by the time we get to this place, it's not like your typical resort. Like there aren't attendants everywhere. You had one guy that handed you the key and walked you to your room. And by the time we got there, it was the evening time and the sun was setting. And he walked us to our room. And as we walked into our room, I had joked with him. I said, I've been here for a few days already in Fiji, and I haven't had any kava. And kava is the traditional ceremonial drink. Kava is to the indigenous Fijians what tobacco would be to the Lakota people. It is very sacred. Mm-hmm. And the way you find people smoking tobacco outside of the ceremony, it's become social. And so same thing with kava, it's become social. And so I had joked with him about not drinking any kava. And I took an emotional risk, I felt, because he was a perfect stranger and he received my, joke in a real a funny way. He just kind of laughed and he had this shocked look like, oh my God, like, right? Like, forgive us, as if on behalf of the island, forgive us. We haven't offered you this just yet. And so we get back to the room and I'm talking to my wife and I go, hey, I wonder, do you think he was serious? Like, if I went out there, if he doesn't have any, I don't want to make him feel bad. And
so he invited you to.
Yeah. So he invited me. He goes, hey, come here and then I'll have something for you. And so I wasn't sure if it was serious or not. And I took the risk and I went out there and sure enough, it was ready. And now it's completely dark. We're top of the hill and you can't see anything aside from the lights in the pool in this resort. And out of maybe 7 units that were there, maybe one of them was occupied and, it looked like they called it in early that evening. And so I sat with him and here it was 2 perfect strangers sitting, sipping on kava. And kava is this traditional drink made out of this root that they say embodies heart energy. It's a mild sedative, and it makes your tongue a little bit numb. And it is ground up and it's pulverized, and it's made into this traditional beverage with a bowl, inside of a bowl. And inside of that bowl, there's a bowl. And that bowl is sacred, right? That bowl is the womb.
Whoa.
And so there's customs. So even in social settings, there are ceremonies, even if you're in social ceremonies, right? And then you stir it up, and then each person has their own bowl. So from the big bowl, each of you are served from that into your own cup. And so here we were sharing this kava, and I began to speak. And I began to speak in my broken Hindi / English, in my strong desire, because even though I had just met, I felt connected to him, and I just started telling my story, and about how old I was, and this is who my father was, and this is who my mother was, and how my uncle fell in love with this girl in San Francisco, and he jumped on a plane, and love, took us across the seas, and I must have gone on for 15, 20 minutes straight. And as I'm talking to him, fascinated with like, hey man, you're doing pretty clean with your Hindi there. I was struck by how he was locked right into me, eye to eye. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about a concept called deep empathic listening, where you are listening so deeply, you are receiving so deeply, that all of a sudden the other person feels this free rein to just share more and share more. And so for me, going back after 30 years felt like a pilgrimage, but it wasn't until that moment where it was just pouring out of me with him doing deep listening that I felt a certain sort of healing taking place, and that healing was in the form of acceptance. So any part of me that felt like I didn't belong here, and the way in which he received me, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be.
Oh my God, yeah.
And so then we kind of reversed, right? And then so he began to share his story about Hurricane Winston and how, the storm and what they did to survive, and how they had to tie their house down with rope, with concrete posts that goes into the ground. And so I felt like he gave me a gift, and that gift was, this is how you listen. And that was, I think, one of the medicines that I walked away with. And it was the perfect medicine, because when I got to my father's land, where my father was born, there was that side of me. I hadn't seen these family members in 30 years. I had grown, and I had changed, and I had evolved. And there was that insecure American side to me. And I say American, I don't mean that disrespectfully. I'm not sure if it's an American thing or just a human thing. But that side of me that was, how much different had I become from the person they remember me as who I was, that perhaps they won't receive me, or perhaps they won't like me. And so what was fascinating to me is we get back to my dad's village, and the dirt road was the same dirt road as it was, when I was 7 years old and he took me there. 6 years old, 5 years old when he took me there. And the sugarcane was the same sugarcane plantation as it was. And I sat there in the same manner, in the same spirit as this brother in this other space. And they received me in the same way as if I had never left.
Wow.
And I didn't have to impress them with anything. I'm not sure what was in their head, honestly, but it felt as if they weren't just receiving me, but they were receiving my father, who had passed 3 years prior. So on my father's childhood land, where generations of people had cut sugarcane, when my father had passed, his brothers had a funeral ceremony in the traditional way on that land. And they had erected an altar that was still present and still standing. And so when I say that I felt like that they received me as well as my father, I'm not necessarily speaking in metaphoric sense. I mean that when they were looking at me, I felt as if I was carrying my father as well.
Wow.
there's so many takeaways with this particular story. And one of those for me, upon reflection, is the fact that you can spend many years with a whole lot of people and not feel like you can connect with them. But if you enter a particular space, then even with a stranger that you've just met, it's as if you spent a whole lifetime together. And so that sacredness that you can find in that space of deep listening and that deep awareness allows you to go into a place of timelessness.
Powerful, and it really speaks to the depth of our identities, of what ancestors generation after generation have prayed for and continue to pray about, that we don't forget who we are, that we don't forget the journey, that we don't forget who has brought us here. And the powerful and beautiful thing about what you share, Atil, is it's today. That medicine, that ceremony, those traditions, those people that are your relatives live that way today. Because in this Western society, we talk about, back then, or those old traditions. No. There are people that live those today. And what it also impresses me is that even though you've been here for 30 plus years, it's still in you too. Because you were able to receive it, know how to enter in a good way, know how to be there in a good way, and to recognize what was coming in you and to you, and stand in the presence of you carrying your Father's Spirit. And and to me, we talk about healing medicine, we talk about generational medicine and generational healing. As you were speaking, what I felt is not only were you healing, but your Father was healing too. And not only were you received, but your Father was reminded that he did a good job, because he prepared that path on that dirt road for when you would come back, and you not only with you and Rena, but with your daughters too. So they got to experience that as well, And I think, sometimes in this Western world, we forget that the medicine is still here. It is right here with us, and we carry it in that way. And you talked about the first time that I met you and met Rena. I saw it. I felt it. I felt that medicine. Like knows like, brother knows brother. Family knows family. Relative knows relative, right? And I didn't, know you, meaning in my mind, but my spirit says, here's a relative.
Yeah.
Here's a nephew. Here's a niece that, we need to welcome home.
Yeah.
So in that same way, we want to remind everyone that is present. We live in a society right now that is struggling with a sense of racism and oppression, and struggling with a hierarchy of value for people, and looks at people and judges them based on their skin coloration, or even who they think they are, and what's been told to them about who we are. It's really important to recognize that our medicine is within us, and that we have to reclaim that way. So I want to just appreciate you for sharing that beautiful medicine and that beautiful story, and that you were able to sit. We have difficulty sitting over here, without going on and on and on and on, but to be able to sit, that you didn't forget how to sit, and how to honor, and how to listen in that sacred medicine way says so much about who you are. And in the next session, we're going to talk about, you as an acupuncturist, because the reason why people come to you, not just because of your skill as an acupuncturist, but you carry within you that healing medicine of your ancestors. And the thing that I've been impressed with is that, not only do you carry it, you share it. Because as we first met you, you were doing, healing energy work. You knew that you had some of that medicine in you, and you were willing to share that and to help people remember their own sacred balance in that way. So as we get to the final part of this session, share with us how you got here, though. So what happened because going from Fiji now to where, I don't know, where did you end up? You said San Francisco, but I don't know if you came to San Francisco or L.A. or where did you end up in coming over here?
Oh, yeah. So, my uncle picked us up in San Francisco airport. And from there, he was living in Modesto, California. So he was working with the Gallo family making wine in Modesto. And so a lot of us that came over from Fiji, and this is 1977 here, okay? So this was at a time when it was rare to see Indian people. And when you saw an Indian person, it was like it was a big deal, right? And hey, I saw an Indian person today. And so at that time, many of the immigrants from Fiji that ultimately then started to come were working in the factories that were there in the agriculture industry, because this is the heartland, pretty much central California, America's breadbasket. And so my father, being an engineer, couldn't get any work over there. And so from Modesto, he had a friend that was in the San Fernando Valley. And our uncle, Dilip uncle, said, "Hey, come down." And so we came down and stayed with uncle. And, in those days, when we were kids, it was not unusual to have 3 or 4 families in one household. Okay, it's just what you did to receive somebody so they can, ultimately get their footing here.
Right.
And then so Dilip uncle was one of these people that housed a lot of people, and you just stayed with them, and he never told you to leave, and you left when you were ready to leave. And so he came. And in the San Fernando Valley, my father ended up having like 3 job offers in the same week. Wow. If anything, he was overqualified for many of the positions that were open at that time. And so I grew up in the San Fernando Valley in the 80s and 90s, went to Cal State Northridge, went to Los Angeles Valley College. I have to give props to LAVC because met Dr. Miranda there, met Dr. Salzman there, met Dr. Veslowski there. Some of my first teachers that was getting me into consciousness. Dr. Miranda with Chicano Studies, believe it or not, I started to learn about Black and Brown struggle. I would read stories on Malcolm X and the Indian Malcolm X, Subhash Chandra Bose, that conscious but militant action side, that part of wanting to change systems and injustice and oppression and overcoming. And so that ultimately led me to Cal State Northridge, where I was studying communications. But I still didn't know what I wanted to do and I put this in quotes, when I grew up. And I'm still waiting for that to happen, by the way. But
wait. Let me ask you something, because you kind of went through that real quick. Yeah. I'm wondering, because there weren't a lot of Indian folks, in the valley, San Fernando Valley, Modesto. So how did you get treated? What did they think you were Indian, or they think you're Mexican, or what?
We heard it all. Everything from being called Ethiopian, because remember there was a lot of stuff being done. Because I was skinny then, and I'm skinny now. When I did a pilgrimage to India, Indians from India were like, "You're not from America." Yeah, I am, man. You're too skinny to be from America. And then so not only being a skinny Indian kid growing up in the San Fernando Valley. Remember, this is San Fernando Valley. This is Valley Girl territory, okay?
Right.
But I had the wonderful privilege, and I'm saying this sarcastically here, being a skinny Indian kid, one of the only ones around, aside from my brothers, in the 80s growing up in the Valley when Gandhi, the movie, came out.
Oh,
and it started
wow.
winning all these awards. So being called Gandhi isn't a cool thing in those days, you know. Now I literally embrace it. And that's not me being, once I grew up and understood his teachings and his message to the world, I was like, oh my God, what a compliment.
Yeah.
I just,
Yeah.
you know. So it was that. And then in junior high school, and I went to junior high school in a time when cholos had slick back hair and they creased their corduroy jeans. So some of my friends that were that walked that path, taught me how to crease my pants, crease my khakis,
right,
and so. Right. So every now and then I'll have somebody, that's a little bit older that walks in with creased pants. I kind of highlight that, and they're like, "Oh, like, what do you know about this?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, I sense the very positive side of your family that talks about, that story. I also know that there's probably a lot of challenges. And you mentioned, being called Gandhi and being, called many things. I know that there probably was some struggle there too. And what I feel is because you had that rootedness, because you had that medicine from your people, because you had that interconnectedness from that family that you had, you were able to get through that without that negativity, without, not that you didn't get angry and not that, but that you were able then to not let it block you and challenge you. As we close today, because next time I want to talk really about the healing part of the medicine as it bridges between your traditional medicine and that of acupuncture and the work that you do. And because we, now in COVID-19 and all the issues that are coming up, we're now recognizing that Western medicine alone is not going to take care of this, is not going to help us. There's some other things that we need to understand. So next time I want to talk about that.
Sure.
But I want to bring a closure to this in terms of you and your journey and your identity and how did that set the groundwork for you wanting to help share health and healing with people?
So the word identity for me has been something that I think I've been struggling with ever since I got here. So in Fiji, a fish doesn't know it's wet, right? So I didn't know I was an island kid because that's all I knew. I thought everybody on the planet lived like that. And so I come to America, and so now all of a sudden I'm in a different territory. And so I'm in a different situation. Growing up in a household being called Indian, and this is who you are. And then stepping outside and learning how to adapt and speak like, the slang of the day and connecting with the people in the American culture. So that's another identity. And then somewhere in college, then I began to then question my Indian identity. How can I get more of that? Because when I would meet Indian people that were from India, they didn't consider us from Fiji Indian. So what is an Indian? Many lives, many masters, right? So then we come across a teacher, Laitole Odeonyo Le Baba. We just called him Baba for short. And one time we were having dialogue with him. And one time he asked us, he goes, "Who are you? What are you?" And I had my long hair back then, me and my brothers, and, we were representing roots and culture and, this whole thing. And I thought he was going to spit something deep in a sense of, bloodline and ancestry and this and that. And he says, "You're nobody." And I was like, okay, he's about to get Zen on us, right? Like you're, and he was real soft spoken and real respectful and real polite. And he says, "You're no body. You're not a body. And who are you? You're no one. You're not one. And so you're not this one thing that you think you are that one. And so I remember, and so through that, I felt like initiating. He was that teacher that came to that point of my search in terms of identity. And he said, identify with spirit. Then you'll be welcome anywhere.
Wow.
You can go anywhere. And so it was Mahatma Gandhi. I remember first saying it, and he may have gotten it from somewhere. He said, the Atma, what we in my tradition call the soul, the Atma is a circle that has a center in one place. It's the place where you are. But that has a circumference. Circles have circumferences, right? Mm-hmm. That has a circumference everywhere.
Wow.
So your Atma is not bound by your body. Your soul, your spirit is not bound by your body. And he goes, so what is God? God is a circle that has a center everywhere, that has a circumference everywhere.
Wow.
And so then I began to identify with the spiritual calling portion of it. And I felt like with that spirit, my father had a lot of sayings. And one of the sayings he used to say is if you know one religion, you know none.
Oh.
So he encouraged us to pray with lots of different people of lots of different traditions. Mm-hmm. In fact, he's been in ceremonies with us with lots of people, with lots of traditions. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just speech, it was his actions.
Yeah.
Where it says, oh, it's okay to pray in that way. Mm-hmm. It's not something I'm familiar with. Mm-hmm. So then I began to identify with the spiritual self. And I think with the spiritual journey, that is what brought me to the doorsteps of Asian medicine. Because at that time, even now, but at that time more so, is Asian medicine was for me the vehicle of carrying these teachings from thousands and thousands of years of teachings. Mm-hmm. That is still current, still relevant, still modern today, but that is rooted in ancient philosophy. But there's a licensure. I don't have to do this out of my garage or in the back house, right?
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful, and I think that's a perfect place for us to kind of close here, and that's what we'll pick up next time, because I want to pick up on that journey of when you begin to balance the medicines, but as you it really spoke so beautifully too, and your teacher said about the sense of spirit and the sense of spirituality, that it really connects with all indigenous thought.
Yeah.
In our language, we say Nkloke Nawake, which is interconnected sacredness, right? And that when you can recognize that you're interconnected to all sacredness, then there are no boundaries. Yeah. And we have the ability with our spirit to be able to embrace all things, Yeah. Atil, just want to thank you for sharing your journey, your story, your medicine, and that of your family, and that of your ancestors. Because I don't think that we get the opportunity to recognize, the rich medicine that we have in all of our communities, And I see it not only in you, I see it in Rena, I see it in your daughters, I see it, I've been able to experience it so many ways, even when we visit, when we share together, when we laugh together, we listen to music together, but sometimes we haven't seen each other for months, and we see you and it's like it was yesterday, So I as we close this session, I want to just reinforce, to our audience, that significance of that, the medicine of generations, the medicine of the ancestors, that lives within you, whether you logically know it or not, whether you've met your great-grandmother or great-grandfather or not, that is within you. It is within your spirit. You carry that, and sometimes all it takes is your willingness to sit. And as you said, to listen in that sacred way, right, to what they want to say to you, as we close today, I want to invite everyone to take that moment, to take that time to sit and to listen and to call to your ancestors and ask them to come in you and speak in you and embrace you in that eternal spirituality. You know, we invite you to come back with us next week as we'll sit again with Atil, Dr. Narayan. We'll sit with him and we're going to continue this dialogue and continue this journey. You know, I invite you to share any comments that you have, any reflections. You know, share this podcast with others, and we want to just thank you again. And you know, may you have a blessed day and continue this ancestor journey of healing generations. Thank you all very, very much.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.